Readathons are one of my favorite things, and I've been participating in a range of different kinds of readathons over the past couple years, so I thought I would share with you some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over this time as to how to really make the most of a readathon. So I've separated these tips into preparation and reading time. How to prepare yourself for a readathon. Tip number 1. Coming up to a readathon, it is a good idea to plan ahead, and in doing so you need to know your reading limits. By knowing how much or how fast you can read, you can set yourself goals that are challenging but reasonable and not ridiculous. And really consider how much you think you'll be able to read, because stressing out during the week over how many books you're reading and not being able to meet your goal is the wrong way to approach a readathon. It is purely for fun and to read as much as you can, so by lessening your goal by a book or two, you probably end up being much happier with your achievements at the end of the day, and if you exceed those goals, then that's even better. When compiling your TBR pile though, I would definitely recommend setting aside some other books that you'd be interested in reading, either to take a break from any of the other books that you're reading or just something that you're really excited about. This stockpile is good for switching things up a little bit prior to the readathon if you change your mind, but it's also good during the readathon, but I'll talk about that in a little while. Tip number 2. Get yourself into the reading zone. And by this, I mean just get excited, get pumped about the readathon. You're gonna have an awesome time reading some awesome books, so get excited about it. To do so, definitely take to the internet, or even find some friends that would love to participate with you in real life. But if you don't have that, then definitely hit up Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, even YouTube, make a video about it, tweet people, post a photo of your TBR pile. Just really immerse yourself into the community of readers for the readathon. Now for tip number 3, have your meals prepared, because aside from sleep and any other commitments I have, I usually devote my entire time to reading, and this often means that I forget about the food part. So I definitely recommend keeping a nice pile of energy boosting foods and beverages close by, preferably non-messy ones if possible, unless you don't mind spilling things all over your books. I usually stick with ready to eat snacks or easy to prepare foods, especially when it comes to having the larger meals, because you don't want to spend too much time preparing food when you could be reading. Now moving on to the reading part. The actual readathon has begun, so what are some ways to keep yourself motivated? Tip number 4. If a book isn't keeping your attention, stop. This will help to avoid any slumps, but also picking up a book that you're really excited about and that you just can't put down will result in much more reading. It's totally okay to switch up your TBR. It doesn't have to be strict. And like I mentioned before, I encourage you to do so. Have a stockpile ready that you can switch things up if need be. Tip number 5. Don't compare yourself to other readers. I am an extremely competitive person, so I have to keep telling myself this all the time. The thing is, everyone reads at a different pace, and it's just unfair to yourself to compare your reading accomplishments with someone who's reading a book with larger font or pictures in it. They may have less commitments than you do, or they just read at a faster pace than you. Everyone is different when it comes to reading and their reading situations, so just save yourself the stress and focus on yourself. Focus on your own reading and be happy with what you can do. Tip number 6. Stay away from distractions. This refers to the internet, TV, games, other people if need be. Find a place that's quiet where you can read and really focus on your reading and not be distracted by all these outside sources. I definitely struggle with this one because the internet is a big part of my life. You really need to discipline yourself when it comes to this, and you really need to force yourself to stay away from the temptation. Tip number 7. Now this one kind of contradicts my last tip about distractions, but in need of an emergency, take to the internet. If you're feeling really unmotivated or you're struggling to read and get into that zone, then I usually find that talking to other people that are also doing the readathon can be a really big help. I know that some readathons, especially the Dewey's 24-hour readathon, have a host of cheerleaders. So before the readathon, you'll put up your social media pages or your blog, and during the readathon, these cheerleaders will go around and tweet you or send a comment encouraging you to keep reading and just cheering you on. But what I tend to utilize the most if I'm struggling is Twitter. Twitter. Use the hashtags and talk to other people. But most importantly, do some reading sprints. If you can't find any going on, then start your own. This is where being competitive really helps. You have a set time of reading and you're trying to read as much as you can, maybe even trying to best the other people that are doing it as well. And some sprints even have little mini challenges or activities to do, so it's usually great fun. Now for my next set of tips, I've separated them to be specific to a 24-hour read-a-thon or extended ones, so for like over a weekend, 5-7 days, even longer. I usually like to approach these slightly differently, so I do have different tips for them. I'll pop some annotations up here for the 24-hour and the extended read-a-thons, so if you want to skip between any of them, feel free to click there. 24-hour read-a-thon, starting with tip number 8. With these kinds of read-a-thons, I definitely recommend choosing a series of shorter books. For me, devoting my 24-hour read-a-thon to a chunky book doesn't usually end very well. Even when I'm completely immersed in that story, things can just get a little too intense reading-wise, and my brain starts to just go blah. So I find that choosing a range of shorter books, and particularly from a variety of different genres, is a great way to go. Your focus is on one single book for a shorter period of time, and actually finishing more than one book in a day makes me feel so good. So I would definitely recommend shorter novels, but also graphic novels. These are so easy to fly through, and often they don't have an extensive amount of text, so your focus is constantly moving over these pictures, and they really seem to grab you. Tip number 9, get out of the house. Like I mentioned, you are devoting so much time in a day to reading, and even if you do have a variety of different smaller books, you can still start to lose focus, or you can get distracted by the things around you. Sometimes you just can't resist the temptations. So when I find this happens, I hop in my car and I go to a cafe, or I go sit down by the lake and read there. I find it really helpful to move into a different environment, and I usually set myself a goal of finishing the book that I'm currently reading before I go home. So when I do, I feel really accomplished. It's also good for getting some fresh air. So now moving on to the extended read-a-thons, the ones that happen over multiple days. Tip number 10. As for your reading pile, you can definitely go for the longer books, but I'd also recommend having a mixture of just books with different densities or lengths. Again, utilize the graphic novel, I always do, but you can afford to have a longer book which you can spread out over multiple days. Tip number 11. Make sure you sleep. If I don't get enough sleep, I can actually get really sick. So I try to make sure that I have a decent amount of sleep each night. If not, then I usually end up paying for it the next day. I usually ignore this when it comes to the 24-hour read-a-thon because there's not enough time in that day if you want to get a butt ton of reading done, but when you have several days you can dedicate to reading, you can afford to let your body recover, and I definitely urge you to do so. It's really not worth feeling like absolute shit during a read-a-thon because you won't want to read, and that sucks. So take care of yourself, please. Tip number 12. Don't feel discouraged if you have an off day. During week-long read-a-thons especially, I usually have 1 or 2 days where I read nothing or nowhere near as much as I would like. But this is totally okay. You have the rest of the read-a-thon to make up for it, but sometimes it's good to take a break from reading. You don't want to overload your brain, so embrace that time that you have off and maybe get some of your chores done. So those are some of the things that I find really help me when it comes to read-a-thons and getting as much reading done as I personally can. The main thing is to just have fun with it and don't let yourself stress out. If you do, take a step back and rethink how you're going about the read-a-thon. If you are stressing over things, you probably won't have an enjoyable time during the read-a-thon, and most likely you won't end up reading as much as you would have liked to. It's just a downward spiral. So move away from anything that is causing you stress and just have fun with it, enjoy the reading time, and share the experience with your friends. I hope that you find at least some of these tips helpful for you with your read-a-thons, but like I've mentioned, everyone is different with their reading, so some of those things probably won't work for you. You've just got to discover what does and keep doing it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and that is all. So I'll see you next time. Bye!